Have you ever had a thought so dark, or a feeling so uncomfortable, that you immediately pushed it away? Maybe anger at someone you love. Maybe jealousy that you didn't want to admit. Maybe even a violent or selfish impulse that you felt ashamed of. Well, this is the Re-Entry Archive, and today we're looking at the shadow. Carl Jung described the shadow as one of the most important archetypes of all. It is everything we repress, deny, or refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. But here's the paradox. What we hide from often grows stronger in the dark. Today, we'll look at the shadow archetype in depth, and we'll look at what the shadow is and where the idea came from. As ever, the lessons it's trying to teach us. How its shadow side manifests, because even the shadow itself has a shadow. And how the shadow can emerge in psychedelic experiences. We'll finish with some practical ways to integrate the shadow, so instead of being haunted by it, you can grow through it. Jung first articulated the idea of the shadow as part of his broader framework of the psyche, when Freud spoke of repression and the unconscious. Jung refined this by saying, the shadow is made up of all the traits, emotions, and desires that don't fit the image we want to have of ourselves. If you want to be a good person, then selfishness and anger and envy gets pushed into the shadow. If you want to be strong, then your vulnerability and fear gets buried. If you want to be kind, then your aggression hides in the dark. It's important to remember the shadow is not simply things which are bad, but things which have been disowned. This means that the shadow could also contain creativity, passion, sexuality, and power, if those things didn't fit the persona. Jung wrote, everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's consciousness, the blacker and denser it becomes. So why do we have a shadow? What purpose does it serve? The shadow is like a psychic storage box. It holds what we couldn't accept at the time. As children, if we were scolded for anger, anger went into the shadow. If you were told not to cry, sadness went into the shadow. On one level, it protects us. It allows us to survive in families and cultures with such strict rules. But on another level, it creates a split psyche. Part of us we pretend doesn't exist, but which still influences unconsciously. The shadow shows up in projections. When we see in others what we can't admit in ourselves, for example, accusing someone else of arrogance while refusing to see our own pride. Triggers, often emotional reactions, signal the shadow as being touched in some way. Shadow also shows up in dreams and fantasies, where repressed images rise to the surface in symbolic form. So the shadow is not just a nuisance, it is a teacher. It points to the part of ourselves that are waiting to be acknowledged and integrated. The central lesson of the shadow is this: wholeness requires us to face what we reject. Instead of pretending to be pure light, we must accept that we are both light and dark. So some central lessons include self-honesty. Shadow teaches us to stop lying to ourselves. We aren't saints. We aren't perfect. But in admitting this, we become more real. Compassion. By seeing our own shadow, we often soften our judgment of others. If I know that I'm capable of cruelty, I'm less likely to dehumanise someone else for their cruelty. Hidden gifts. Often the shadow contains energy we actually need. A nice person may need to reclaim assertiveness, and a tough person may need to reclaim softness. Integration over repression. The shadow insists that what is denied does not disappear. Instead, it leaks out in unhealthy ways until we bring it into consciousness. Here's the tricky part. Even the shadow has a shadow side. When the shadow is completely ignored, it can erupt violently. And this can look like outbursts of rage, self-sabotage, or addiction. Even destructive collective movements. Jung believed wars often represented the eruption of a collective shadow. But even when we begin shadow work, there's a danger. We can become fascinated with the darkness. Some people over-identify with their shadow and start glorifying it, excusing cruelty as just being authentic or wallowing in self-destructive patterns under the illusion of doing the work. So the shadow's shadow is this. If we don't approach it with humility, it consumes us. Nowhere is the shadow more vividly encountered than in psychedelic states. Many people go into psychedelics expecting bliss, beauty, and cosmic love, and sometimes that's what we get. But often the medicine opens the door to the shadow. There can be terrifying visions of snakes and demons and monsters, which often symbolise repressed fears or impulses. There can be emotional purging, waves of anger and grief and shame rising to the surface. There can be the confrontation of the ego, seeing yourself in brutally honest ways, your arrogance, your cruelty, your hypocrisy. Sometimes this is what's called a bad trip, but from the Jungian perspective, these things aren't bad at all. They are simply encounters with the shadow. The medicine is simply saying, here is what you've been hiding. Look at it, face it, integrate it. For example, a man who prides himself on being gentle may be shown his repressed aggression, perhaps through violent imageries or feelings of rage. The lesson here isn't to act out violence, but to acknowledge that aggression exists within him and can be channeled healthily. The shadow shows up in psychedelics, not to harm us, but to demand wholeness. Encountering the shadow in psychedelics can be overwhelming, but the real work begins afterwards, through integration. Here are some practices to work with. Journaling projections. Ask, who irritates me the most right now? What qualities do they embody? And then ask, where does that live within me? You can try dialoguing with the shadow. Write a letter to the shadow and let it respond through you. You may be surprised what it has to say. We can try active imagination. Jung had a technique of entering into dialogue with images from dreams or trips. If a monster appeared in your trip, visualize it again in meditation and ask, what do you want from me? What lessons are you teaching? We can use creative expression. We can try to paint the shadow, write poetry from its perspective, dance with its energy, Creativity allows safe expression of repressed material. Finally, there is therapy and community. Shadow work can be destabilizing. Working with a therapist or a trusted group can provide support and accountability. Let's illustrate this with some more examples. The angry shadow. A man takes ayahuasca and is overwhelmed by visions of fire and violence. He realizes he has suppressed decades of anger from childhood abuse. In integration, he learns to express anger through healthy boundaries and physical outlets like martial arts, rather than repressing it. The vulnerable shadow. A woman on psilocybin has visions of herself as a crying child. She feels humiliation, but also tenderness. She realizes she's been over-identifying with being independent and denying her need for support. Integration here means allowing herself to ask for help. In Jung's model of individuation, confronting the shadow is a non-negotiable step. If you ignore the shadow, you live half a life, always chasing light and always denying darkness. But if you face it, you become whole. The shadow is not here to destroy you. It's here to make you whole. It's like compost. On the surface, it looks like waste, but if integrated properly, it fertilizes growth. Psychedelics can accelerate this process. If used properly, they tear open the unconscious and show us what we have buried. But it can be terrifying. But often, in confrontation, lies transformation. Let me perhaps offer some prompts you can use to work with the shadow. Ask yourself, what trait in others do you most despise? Could that be a disowned part of yourself? What emotions do you avoid at all costs? And where might these emotions be trying to surface? If your shadow could speak, what would it say to you? What gifts might lie hidden in parts of yourself that you reject? You can pause this video and ask yourself these questions and write your answers down. You might be surprised at what comes up. So in summary, the shadow archetype is everything we repress or deny about ourselves. It teaches honesty, compassion, and wholeness. Its shadow side emerges if we either repress it completely or glamorize it. In psychedelics, the shadow often appears through terrifying and challenging experiences, but these are invitations, not punishments. Integration means learning to face, dialogue with, and creatively express the shadow so that its energy becomes fuel for growth. The shadow archetype ultimately teaches us this. Wholeness is found not by escaping darkness, but by turning towards it. Psychedelics make that confrontation unavoidable. They strip away the mask and force us to meet the part of ourselves that we'd rather not see. But if we could do that with courage, humility, and compassion, we discover that the shadow is not our enemy. It is our hidden ally.